When my daughter got married, I wasn't invited. I didn't even know there was a wedding until I saw the message, "We got married yesterday." Those 4 words hit harder than any storm. I was standing in my kitchen still wearing my nightgown when my phone buzzed. I thought maybe she was checking in, maybe she finally wanted to talk after weeks of silence. But no. My daughter, my only child, had sent me a text message that changed everything. "We got married yesterday. No photos, no explanation, not even a call." For a long moment, I just stood there, the sound of the refrigerator humming behind me, the smell of coffee burning on the stove. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I read the message again and again, hoping I had misunderstood. Maybe she meant someone else's wedding. Maybe she was joking. But then I saw the little heart emoji at the end, and the truth cut through me like a blade. My daughter, the same girl who once begged me to braid her hair before school, had started a new life, and she hadn't wanted me to be part of it. I'm Evelyn Brooks. I'm 68 years old, a retired accountant, a widow for more than 10 years. I've always been careful measured someone who believes in logic and order, but that morning I realized that betrayal doesn't care about logic. It just burns. My daughter Hannah was my pride. After her father passed, I raised her alone. I worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and gave her everything she needed to have a better life. She was brilliant, ambitious, beautiful, everything I had ever hoped she'd become. But somewhere along the way, she started looking at me differently. My simple clothes embarrassed her. My small house wasn't aesthetic enough. She told me once, half joking, that she didn't want her future husband to think she came from humble beginnings. I laughed it off back then. I thought she was just young, still trying to find her place in the world. I didn't realize she was slowly building a new one without me. When I read that message, I felt the room spin. I called her number immediately. It went to voicemail. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I sent a message. "Why didn't you tell me, sweetheart?" The message was seen, but there was no reply. A few minutes later, another text arrived, but not from her. It was from her husband. I had met him twice before, a tall man with perfect hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Evelyn." "We decided to keep it small," he wrote. "Just family and a few close friends. We didn't want to make it awkward for anyone." I stared at that line until the words blurred. Awkward for anyone. I wasn't just excluded. I was the embarrassment they wanted to avoid. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Hannah had done her homework every night, the same place where we used to plan her birthdays and dream about her future. And all I could think was, when did I become the person she wanted to hide? I tried to remember the last time we had really talked. Not the quick phone calls about errands or bills, but a real conversation. It must have been over a year ago when she told me about her promotion. She was proud, radiant, full of new energy. I remember telling her how proud I was, how much her father would have loved to see her succeed. She had smiled, thanked me, and then, almost as an afterthought, added, "Mom, you should really think about downsizing that old house. It's too much for you now." I didn't realize it then, but that was the first step, the first brick in the wall she was quietly building between us. Now that wall was complete. I stood up, poured myself a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and tried to steady my breath. My reflection in the kitchen window looked older than I remembered. Tired eyes, thin lips, hair starting to gray at the roots. I had always been the practical one, the quiet one, the woman who kept things in order. But that morning, there was chaos in my chest. I tried to be rational. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the wedding had been spontaneous. Maybe they'd planned to tell me later, but deep down I knew. Hannah's new life didn't have room for the woman who raised her. The betrayal wasn't just about being excluded. It was about what it meant. It meant I was no longer part of her story. That evening, my neighbor Patricia knocked on the door. She's the kind of woman who knows everything about everyone in the neighborhood. Her eyes were wide with a mix of excitement and guilt. "Evelyn, dear, I just wanted to say, congratulations," she said, handing me her phone. On the screen was a post Hannah's wedding photos, a beautiful garden white roses candlelight, a string quartet, Hannah in a designer gown, her husband in a sharp tuxedo, dozens of guests smiling, clapping. Patricia whispered, "You must be so proud." proud. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I forced a smile, nodded, and thanked her before closing the door. When I was alone again, I sat on the couch and scrolled through every photo. Each image was another stab. My daughter laughing, my daughter dancing, my daughter hugging her husband's parents. In one photo, she was holding a bouquet of lilies, the same flowers I had planted for her graduation. And there, in the background, I noticed something else. The necklace around her neck. It was my necklace, my late husband's gift to me on our 25th anniversary. The emerald pendant I had promised to give her on her wedding day. She hadn't asked for it. She had simply taken it. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened and my eyes blurred with tears. I whispered into the empty room, "You took everything, didn't you?" Hours passed. The night grew darker, but I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, surrounded by the quiet ticking of the clock. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I opened the drawer and pulled out an old photo album, Hannah's childhood, her first birthday, her first day of school, her father holding her hand. Each photo told a story of love, sacrifice, and hope. I had worked my entire life for her happiness, and now she had traded that love for status. My eyes landed on the last photo in the album, a picture of us on her high school graduation day. I remembered her words, "Mom, one day when I get married, you'll walk me down the aisle since Dad can't." I touched the photo and felt a tear slip down my cheek. That promise was gone. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. Instead, I did something else. I went to the old cabinet in my study, unlocked it, and pulled out a black folder. Inside was my will, something I had written years ago after my husband died. Back then, everything I owned was meant for Hannah, the house, the savings, the small pension I had left. I had written her name over and over, believing she would cherish what we built together. But now, staring at that paper, I realized how blind I had been. I held the folder in my lap for a long time, listening to the sound of the rain tapping against the window. Betrayal changes the sound of everything it makes. Even the rain feels like it's whispering accusations. I whispered to myself, maybe it's time to change the story. I folded the will carefully, placed it back inside the cabinet, and locked it again. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Sometimes love must end for dignity to begin. I looked around the room, the pictures on the wall, the worn furniture, the soft golden light from the lamp, and realized how quiet my life had become. Yet in that silence, something inside me shifted. A part of me that had been too kind, too forgiving, began to wake up. I picked up my phone one last time that night and opened Hannah's message again. "We got married yesterday." I typed a reply, but my fingers hesitated above the keyboard. Then I erased it. She didn't need a reply. Instead, I turned the phone off, closed my eyes, and whispered, "You made your choice. Now it's my turn." If you've ever been betrayed by someone, you raised someone you would have given your last breath for, tell me, would you forgive them? Or would you finally protect what's left of your soul? Comment 1 if you think I should forgive and hit. Like if you believe some lessons must be learned the hard way, because this isn't just a story about a wedding. It's a story about a woman who learned that sometimes love without respect isn't love at all. The next morning, I woke up to the same silence that had wrapped around the house the night before. But this time it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that follows an explosion, still but thick with the smell of smoke and the echo of something broken. I made coffee out of habit, even though my hands were still trembling. The sunlight cut through the curtains, landing on the corner of the dining table, where the wedding photos had played on Patricia's phone just 12 hours earlier. I hadn't slept. My mind kept looping back to that message. We got married yesterday, and to that necklace gleaming green around Hannah's neck, like a cruel reminder of everything she'd taken without asking. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, a question had started repeating in my head. Why didn't she tell me shame, pride, or something worse? When the coffee was ready, I sat down at my desk and tried to distract myself by checking my emails, my bills, my bank statements, things that had always given me comfort. Order structure numbers that made sense, but that morning, one number didn't. My savings account. The balance was lower than I remembered, much lower. I frowned and checked the transaction history. There it was, a transfer made 2 weeks ago, $4,000 withdrawn to a checking account I didn't recognize. My name was listed as the authorizer. That was impossible. I hadn't touched that account in months. A cold wave spread through me. I checked again, scrolling through every transaction. There were 3 more withdrawals over the past few months, smaller ones spaced apart, all signed off electronically, all using my credentials. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I just stared at the screen, heart pounding in my throat. Then I remembered something that made my stomach twist. 6 months earlier, Hannah had insisted on helping me modernize my online banking. She'd come over one weekend, sat beside me on this very chair, and said with that bright, efficient smile, "Mom let me set up automatic bill payments for you. It'll make things easier." I had trusted her. I had let her create a joint login for emergencies. I hadn't thought twice. Why would I? She was my daughter. Now I realized she hadn't just taken my necklace. She had taken my access, my safety, my trust, the quiet sense of control I had built my whole life on. I printed out the statements and stared at them spread across my desk, the numbers swimming before my eyes. I tried to breathe evenly, but my chest felt tight. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was practical, financial, intentional. I called the bank, pretending to be calm. The young woman on the line was polite, professional. "Mrs. Brooks, the transfers were authorized through your verified account. Do you have another family member listed on the profile?" My throat closed for a second before I could answer. "Yes, my daughter. But she shouldn't have had access to make withdrawals." The woman hesitated. "I see that her name appears on the account as a co-user with secondary privileges. That authorization was added in May. Would you like to remove her access?" I swallowed hard. May. That was exactly when Hannah had helped me modernize. My voice came out steady even though my hands were shaking. "Yes, remove it immediately." The representative typed for a while and then said, "Done. You'll receive confirmation by email." When I hung up, I sat very still. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was grief. The kind of grief that comes not from death, but from realizing someone you love has quietly buried your trust while you were still alive. The phone rang, startling me. It was Patricia again. Her voice was bright, unaware of the storm brewing on my end. "Evelyn, dear, I just wanted to ask, was that your daughter's wedding at the Garden Court Pavilion? I heard it was lovely. The food, the music, the dress, everyone's talking about it." The words blurred together. "Garden Court Pavilion," I repeated. "Yes, that's what it said on the photographer's page. Quite the expensive venue. My niece looked into it for her wedding last year. $20,000 just to book the place." $20,000. My heart skipped. My daughter worked as a freelance graphic designer. Her husband managed a startup that hadn't broken even yet. $20,000 for a venue didn't make sense, unless that they'd had help. Unless the help had come from me. "Patricia," I said quietly, "did the photos say when it was booked?" She chuckled. "Oh, probably months ago, dear. These things take planning." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." After she hung up, I sat in silence again, letting the pieces fall into place one by one like dominoes. Hannah hadn't just hidden her wedding from me, she had used my money to pay for it. The room felt smaller, suffocating. I got up, walked to the living room, and stared at the family portraits on the mantel. Hannah at 6, missing a front tooth. Hannah at 12, holding a science fair trophy. Hannah at 18, standing next to her father at her graduation. I reached out to touch the frame, but my hand froze halfway. I couldn't bring myself to hold her face anymore. I sat back down and tried to think rationally the way I used to when I handled clients' finances. What were the facts for withdrawals? Over $6,000 missing. A high-end wedding paid in cash. My signature on every document. The pattern was too precise to be accidental. I decided to call Linda, an old colleague from the accounting firm. She'd retired a few years after me, but still did tax work for a few private clients. Linda had always been the one to tell me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. She picked up on the second ring. "Evelyn, what a surprise. It's been ages." "Linda," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need some advice. Financial advice." Within minutes, she was listening in silence as I explained everything: the text, the wedding, the missing money. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Oh, honey," she said finally, "this sounds bad, but you have to stay calm. Do you have documentation?" I printed the statements. "Good. Keep them. Don't confront her yet. People make terrible decisions when they think they've gotten away with something. You want her to show you who she really is. Linda, I whispered, she already has. Linda sighed, then protect yourself. Call your lawyer. And Evelyn, if you need a place to stay or just someone to talk to, call me anytime. Please. When we hung up, I felt a flicker of warmth under all the pain. The kind of warmth that comes from knowing at least one person still saw me. But that flicker quickly faded when I turned and saw the unopened wedding invitation I had once imagined receiving, the one that never came. That night I poured myself a small glass of wine and sat by the window staring out at the quiet street. My reflection in the glass looked older, harder, less naive. Somewhere inside me, something had shifted, not broken, but rearranged. I had spent my whole life teaching Hannah about honesty, about working hard, about earning what you have. But now I saw what I had failed to teach her: boundaries, the courage to say no. And maybe that failure had come from my own inability to say it myself. I closed my eyes and whispered to the empty room, "You took my money, Hannah. You took my trust, but you will not take my peace." For the first time in years, I locked every drawer, every cabinet, every file. The house was silent again, but this time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt protective, like a wall finally being built, not to keep love out, but to keep the lies from coming back in. And as I turned off the lights and walked toward my bedroom, I knew this was only the beginning. If you've ever discovered a betrayal hidden behind a smile, tell me, would you confront them right away, or would you wait quietly to see what else they're capable of? Comment 1. If you'd confront them, hit. Like if you'd wait for the truth to reveal itself. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. 2 days passed, but the air in the house still felt heavy, as if betrayal had a scent that lingered long after it happened. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, by baking, by folding laundry that didn't need folding, but none of it worked. The silence seemed to mock me. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of Hannah, the half-empty teacup she'd left behind last time she visited, the birthday card she'd signed, "Love you forever, Mom." 2 years ago, before forever became a lie. On the third day, the phone rang again. It was Linda, her voice brisk but kind. "Evelyn, I've been thinking. You should check your credit reports. Make sure no new accounts were opened in your name." I hadn't even thought of that. I opened my laptop, went through the motions, and froze. There it was. A new line of credit opened 6 months ago, linked to my address under my name, but with a contact email that wasn't mine. I clicked for details and saw the same familiar pattern: small purchases at first, then larger ones. Designer clothes, a catering company, a down payment to Garden Court Pavilion. My mouth went dry. That was the wedding venue Patricia had mentioned. I called Linda, immediately reading her every line. "That's fraud, Evelyn." "It's your daughter," she said flatly. I felt dizzy. She must have used the joint verification when she set up my banking. She must have copied my ID. Linda exhaled. "I'm so sorry, honey, but you need to understand what this means." This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was planned. I didn't answer. The word planned echoed in my mind like a bell tolling for something that had died long ago, the version of my daughter I thought I knew. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, staring at the fading light over the street. My neighbor's teenage son waved to me from across the yard, and I waved back automatically. I wondered what it must feel like to be that young again, to believe family means safety. I used to believe that too. When the mail arrived, I opened it without thinking bills adds a charity letter. But one envelope stood out. Elegant cream paper, gold edges, no return address. I tore it open. Inside was a glossy wedding announcement, the same venue, the same couple. Mr. and Mrs. Jameson Cordell request the honor of your presence in celebrating their marriage held on June 14th. I almost laughed. They hadn't even bothered to remove me from the mailing list, or maybe it was a cruel twist of fate that this one slipped through. Either way, there it was, official proof of the day I was erased. Later that night, unable to sleep, I went through my photo albums again, tracing Hannah's face through the years. I stopped at one picture, her 16th birthday. Her smile had been wide and genuine then. I remembered her saying, "Mom, I hope when I grow up, I'll be just like you. Strong, smart, independent." I wondered when that hope had turned into embarrassment, when my thrift store dresses and secondhand furniture had become symbols of shame in her new world. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk just to clear my head. As I passed the bakery on Elm Street, I saw a familiar face through the window, a woman named Martha, one of Hannah's high school teachers. She waved, smiling warmly, and I went inside. "Evelyn." "It's been ages," she said. "I saw Hannah's wedding pictures online. She looked stunning." There it was again, that casual cruelty that people don't realize they're inflicting. "Yes," I said softly, "she did." Martha tilted her head. "I assumed you were there, of course. It looked so intimate, so exclusive." I shook my head. "No, I wasn't invited." Her expression faltered, awkward pity flooding her eyes. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's all right," I interrupted. "You didn't know." But the words didn't make it true, because everyone would know soon enough. The whole town would talk about how Evelyn Brooks, the quiet accountant, had been left out of her own daughter's wedding, about how maybe she wasn't as good of a mother as people thought. The whispers would travel fast. They always did. I walked home slower than usual, the summer air thick and humid. Every step felt heavier. By the time I reached my porch, I could hear the faint hum of my old answering machine. The light blinked 2 new messages. I pressed play. The first was from an unknown number. A cheerful female voice said, "Hi, Mrs. Brooks. This is Clara from Garden Court Pavilion. We just wanted to confirm the final payment has been received for the Cordell wedding. Please extend our congratulations to your family." My blood ran cold. Final payment has been received. Using my name, my credit, my account. The second message came seconds later. It was Hannah. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Mom, I know you probably hate me right now. I wanted to tell you, but Jameson thought it would be better if we kept it small. His parents are very particular about appearances. I promise we didn't mean to hurt you. I'll come by next week to talk, okay? I love you." I replayed that last line. "I love you" again and again. It sounded rehearsed, like an afterthought. I could almost hear Jameson's voice coaching her. "Say you love her. It'll calm her down." I sat in my living room for a long time, the sound of the clock ticking louder with each passing minute. Every part of me wanted to pick up the phone and scream to ask, "How could you?" But something stopped me. Maybe pride. Maybe the last bit of self-control I still had. Instead, I called Linda again and told her everything, the credit line, the calls, the messages. She listened in silence, then said, "Evelyn, I think it's time you contact your lawyer. This is beyond family drama. This is theft." "I don't want to send her to jail," I whispered. "I know, but you have to protect yourself. Sometimes protecting yourself is the only way to teach them what they've done." That night, I took out my black folder again, the will. I placed it on the dining table next to the stack of bank statements and the wedding announcement. My whole life laid out in papers and numbers, the proof of my love and the proof of her betrayal. I sat there for hours thinking about what to do. I thought about my husband, Richard. He'd been gone for 15 years, but his voice still lived somewhere in my memory. I could almost hear him saying, "Evie, don't let anyone turn your kindness into their currency." He had always known how to see through people, how to measure the truth behind their smiles. Maybe that's why he had always told me to keep a will, not because of greed, but because it's the last place where your voice can't be edited. By the time the sun came up, I had made a decision. I would rewrite the will. Not out of revenge, but out of clarity. If Hannah wanted to build her life on lies, she would have to do it without the foundation I provided. But before I called the lawyer, I wanted confirmation, solid proof that the wedding had been paid with my money. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I drove to the bank that afternoon. The young clerk recognized me and smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Brooks. How can I help you today?" "I'd like to see detailed statements for all accounts under my name for the last 6 months," I said. She nodded and went to print them. When she handed me the papers, I flipped through them right there at the counter. My breath caught when I saw it. "Transfer to Garden Court Pavilion, $9,800. The date was 1 month before the wedding. The memo line read, "Event reservation, Evelyn B." I almost laughed at the audacity. My daughter hadn't just used my money, she had used my name as cover. The clerk frowned. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" I looked up at her and smiled faintly. "Yes," I said, "everything's finally making sense." When I got home, I placed that statement on top of the will. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. And as I looked at the growing pile of evidence, one thought settled deep in my chest. If they could take from me in secret, then I could take something back in silence. If you found out your own child used your name to fund their lies, would you call the police? Or would you wait and let them believe they'd won until the truth destroyed them? Comment 1 if you'd call them out and hit like if you'd wait for the right moment, because sometimes patience isn't weakness, it's power waiting to strike. The following week stretched like an endless shadow. The air in my house felt colder even though it was midsummer. Maybe it wasn't the air. Maybe it was me shrinking inside myself, afraid that if I moved too quickly, the truth would cut deeper. Every morning, I still made coffee, still watered. The garden still tried to live the way I always had. But the rhythm of my life had changed. Every sound, the squeak of the faucet, the ticking clock, the shuffle of the mailman's steps felt sharper, louder, like the world was reminding me that I was alone. No calls came from Hannah, no visits, no explanations, only silence, heavy and deliberate. I checked my phone every night before bed, hoping to see her name on the screen, even if it was just another lie. But there was nothing. On the 4th day, I went to the grocery store. I needed to feel normal again, to be around people who didn't know what had happened. Or at least I thought they didn't. But when I walked through the aisles, I noticed the glances, quick darting full of curiosity disguised as pity. A woman near the fruit section whispered something to her friend and looked away when I turned. At the checkout, the cashier, a young girl named Lydia, who'd always been kind, hesitated before speaking. "Mrs. Brooks, I saw your daughter's wedding pictures. They were beautiful. You must be so proud." I forced a smile that felt like glass cracking. Yes, very proud. She looked at me with uncertainty, as if she could hear the fracture in my voice. "You didn't go." "No," I said simply. "I wasn't invited." Her eyes widened. She tried to apologize, but I waved her off and paid for my groceries. When I reached my car, my hands were trembling so badly I dropped the bag of apples. They rolled across the parking lot, and I just stood there, watching them scatter, too tired to chase after them. That night, I sat in front of the window, staring at the reflection of my own face in the glass. I barely recognized her. The woman staring back at me had eyes dulled by sleepless nights, hair that had lost its neat shape and shoulders hunched from too many years of carrying the weight of everyone else's happiness. I tried to tell myself that I didn't care what the town thought, but I did. I cared because every whisper felt like a knife twisting in the wound my daughter had left behind. And yet beneath all that pain, there was something else stirring. Not rage, not even sadness, something colder, quieter resolve. The next morning, I decided to walk to the mailbox at the end of the street. It was a small thing, but it gave me purpose. When I opened it, I found a stack of envelopes, bills ads, and one thick letter from my insurance provider. I tore it open without thinking, scanning the first lines. My pulse spiked. Notice of pending property inquiry. I read the next paragraph twice before the meaning sank in. It said my home had been listed for appraisal, pending verification of ownership. The request had come from an external party, Jameson and Hannah Cordell. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. The world tilted. The edges of the letter blurred as my eyes filled with tears I didn't feel fall. My daughter, my only child, the one I raised from nothing. She was trying to sell my house. I went inside, then sat down at the dining table and read the letter again just to make sure it was real. It was. The words were black and merciless on the page. The undersigned parties request verification of property ownership in preparation for potential sale or transfer. There was no signature from me, no consent, just their names, my name, my address, the same address where I had raised her. I picked up the phone and called the insurance office, trying to sound calm. The woman who answered was polite but firm. "Yes, Mrs. Brooks, we received the verification request. It looks like your daughter submitted it through an online portal using your joint account information." "There is no joint account," I said through clenched teeth. "Well, there's a secondary user on the file. It was added last May." May, again. The same month she'd helped me modernize everything. I thanked the woman, hung up, and sat in silence. Outside, the sound of children playing drifted in from the park across the street. It was almost cruel, that ordinary laughter floating through my house while I sat here surrounded by betrayal. My chest felt tight. I wanted to scream to break something, but all I could do was whisper, "You planned this, didn't you?" That afternoon, Linda called again. She must have heard it in my voice before I even said a word. "Evelyn, what happened?" "She's trying to sell the house," I said quietly. There was a long pause on the line. "Oh my God, are you sure?" "I have the paperwork. They sent a verification request in my name." Linda didn't speak for a while, and when she finally did, her voice was softer. "I know this hurts, Evelyn, but you have to see it for what it is. This isn't a misunderstanding anymore. This is theft, intentional, premeditated." Her words were like stones dropping one by one into a well deep and final. I rubbed my forehead. I keep asking myself what I did wrong. I worked. I sacrificed. I gave her everything. How did she become someone who could do this? Linda sighed. "Maybe you gave her too much. Maybe she never learned that love isn't alone." I didn't answer. I didn't know how. After we hung up, I walked around the house, slowly touching everything like I was saying goodbye. The bookshelf Richard built with his own hands, the dining table we bought secondhand when we were newlyweds, the kitchen tiles he'd insisted on fixing himself. Every corner of this house carried a piece of him, a piece of me. The thought of them selling it, turning it into some transaction to cover their debts, was unbearable. I sat on the floor beside the fireplace and took out the old wooden box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters from Richard, old photos, and the first draft of our joint will back when Hannah was still a child. I read the opening line and felt something in me harden. "To our beloved daughter, Hannah, we leave everything we have built together, trusting she will protect it as we protected her." I closed the box. Those words were no longer true. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in the dark, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking like a metronome for my thoughts. I imagined Hannah sitting in her new apartment, laughing with her husband, maybe even planning how to spend the money they'd get from selling this house. I wondered if she felt guilty even for a moment, or if in her mind I was already gone, a name on a document, an obstacle to be cleared. The pain was sharp, but beneath it was something that almost felt like clarity. Maybe this was the moment I had to stop being the soft mother who always forgave, who always believed people would come around. Maybe this was the moment I had to become something else. I got up, walked to my desk, and turned on the lamp. The golden light filled the room, warm and steady. I took out a blank notebook and began to write dates, amounts, conversations, every small detail of what had happened since that text message. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was doing it to remember, to make sure that when I finally acted, I wouldn't doubt myself. By the time I finished, the first light of dawn was touching the curtains. I looked around at the familiar walls and whispered, "You tried to erase me, Hannah, but you forgot something. I built this life before you ever learned to walk. If your child tried to take the very roof over your head, would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait until they thought they'd succeeded before revealing the truth? Comment 1, if you'd confront them and hit, like if you'd wait for them to fall into their own trap. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's the calm before the reckoning. By the end of that week, the silence broke, not with an apology, not with remorse, but with a knock on my door. It was early evening. The sun was slipping down, painting the curtains gold. I was sitting in the living room, half lost in thought, when I heard the soft tapping. For a moment, I didn't move. I knew who it was. I had been waiting for this without admitting it to myself. When I opened the door, Hannah was standing there, her hands clasped in front of her, her face pale but composed. She was dressed beautifully as always, in a beige blazer and silk blouse. Behind her stood Jameson tall, smiling faintly, one hand in his pocket, the picture of polite arrogance. I almost didn't recognize my own daughter. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice too gentle, too practiced. I stepped aside silently, letting them in. They walked into my home as if they owned it, as if this house already belonged to them. I noticed how Jameson's eyes wandered over the furniture, the photographs, the paintings. He wasn't looking, he was assessing like an appraiser. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, my tone steady, almost neutral. That would be lovely, Hannah said, smiling, though her eyes never quite met mine. I moved to the kitchen, letting the kettle fill the silence. Their voices drifted in from the living room, low, murmured, calculated. When I came back, setting the cups down on the coffee table, Jameson looked up and smiled. Beautiful home you have here, Mrs. Brooks. It must be hard maintaining something this big all alone. I forced a smile. It's not hard if you take care of what you love. His eyes flickered. Hannah cleared her throat. Mom, we wanted to come and talk, properly this time, about what I asked. Her hands twisted in her lap. About everything. The wedding. We didn't mean to hurt you. It all happened so fast, and Jameson's parents wanted to keep it small. Small, I repeated softly, at Garden Court Pavilion. Her eyes widened, caught off guard. How did you... Patricia told me, I interrupted. It's a popular place, apparently. Quite expensive. There was a pause. Jameson reached for his tea, trying to appear at ease. Well, we managed to make it work. With some adjustments. Yes, I said quietly. I imagine my bank account helped. The color drained from Hannah's face. Jameson's smile froze. I don't know what you mean, he said quickly. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice calm. Then let me make it clear. There were withdrawals made under my name. A credit line opened without my consent. Payments to your wedding venue signed Evelyn B. Does that sound familiar? Hannah stared down at her hands, lips pressed tight. Jameson shifted in his seat, his voice turning defensive. Look, Mrs. Brooks, there must be some misunderstanding. Hannah told me you were helping us out as a gift. I turned to my daughter. Is that what you told him? She hesitated. I didn't think you'd mind, Mom. You always said that money was just sitting there. You always said it was for me someday. Someday, I said softly, not yesterday. The air grew thick. For a moment, no one spoke. The sound of the kettle whistling faintly in the kitchen was the only reminder that time was still moving. Jameson finally broke the silence. Look, Evelyn. May I call you Evelyn? We didn't come here to argue. We're in a bit of a situation, and we were hoping you could help. Just temporarily. I almost laughed. Help. He nodded smooth as ever. You see, the down payment for our apartment was higher than we expected, and my firm is restructuring. Cash flow is tight right now. We thought maybe since you have this house, and since you don't really need all this space, we could come to an arrangement. My pulse quickened. An arrangement. Yes, he said. You could sell this place, maybe move into something smaller, more manageable. We could help you with the process, handle all the paperwork. In the end, you'd be more comfortable and we'd all benefit. There it was. The real reason for their visit. Not reconciliation, not guilt, a transaction. I studied my daughter's face. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at her hands again the way she used to when she got caught lying as a child. Except now, she didn't look ashamed. She looked trapped between her husband's ambition and her mother's disappointment. Tell me, I asked quietly, whose idea was this? Jameson smiled faintly. It's just practical Mrs. Brooks. The market's strong right now. You can make a good profit. Think of it as securing Hannah's future. Her future, I repeated, by erasing mine. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I raised a hand to stop him. Do you know what this house means to me? Every tile, every beam, every nail has a memory attached to it. Your wife grew up here. She learned to walk here. She took her first steps right there by the window. Hannah's head jerked up. Mom, please don't make this emotional. I laughed softly. How could it not be? You're talking about selling my life and you want me to be rational. Mom, she said, her voice sharper. Now you're being dramatic. We're just trying to make things easier for you. Easier, I said, leaning forward. Easier for whom? For you, so you can keep living above your means. For him, so he can play the good husband while spending my savings. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't soften. Not this time. Jameson put his cup down, his charm slipping. Mrs. Brooks, I think we're done here. You're clearly upset and this conversation isn't productive. You're right, I said, standing. It's not. But before you go, there's something you should know. I walked to the cabinet in the corner and opened it. The black folder lay inside exactly where I had left it. I placed it gently on the table. Do you know what this is? Hannah blinked. Your will? Yes, the one you've both been counting on. I looked from her to Jameson. I changed it. The color drained from Hannah's face. What? I changed it, I repeated. Yesterday. You'll find your names no longer appear in it. Everything I have, the house, the accounts, the savings, will go elsewhere. Mom, you can't. I can, I said firmly, and I did. Jameson's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Fair? I said softly. Do you really want to talk about Fair Jameson you stole from me? You lied to me. You used my name, my credit, my trust, and you think fairness is still part of this conversation. He stood up, his voice rising. You're overreacting. We're family. No, I said, standing too. Family is built on love, not leverage. Hannah started crying, then quiet tears that fell onto her lap. For a second, the mother in me wanted to reach out to comfort her, to say everything would be all right. But that instinct was gone, buried under the weight of too many lies. Jameson grabbed her arm. Let's go. She looked at me one last time, eyes full of confusion and something like regret. Mom, please don't do this. I met her gaze steady and calm. I'm not the one doing anything, Hannah. You are. They left without another word. I watched from the window as their car pulled out of the driveway, the taillights fading into the dark. For the first time in years, the house felt quiet. Not empty, but peaceful. I walked back to the table and looked at the folder again. My reflection shimmered faintly in its glossy cover. I thought about Richard, what he would have said if he'd been here. Probably something simple, something like, you finally learned to protect yourself. That night, I sat at my desk, took out a new notebook, and wrote at the top of the first page, Phase 1 documentation complete. If your child came to your door asking you to sell your home for their comfort, would you say yes out of love, or would you finally say no to protect yourself? Comment 1, if you'd stand your ground hit. Like if you'd give them one last chance. Because sometimes love that has no boundaries isn't love at all, it's surrender, wearing a familiar face. The morning after they left the house felt different. Not haunted, not empty, just still, as if it was waiting for my next move. I walked through the room, slowly touching the walls, the furniture, the memories. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim standing in the ruins of her life. I felt like the owner of a battlefield mapping out what would come next. By noon, I was sitting across from my lawyer, Daniel Reeves. He'd been Richard's colleague years ago, one of the few people I still trusted. His office was lined with books and smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Daniel looked up from the documents I'd brought him, his expression grave but controlled. You've done the right thing coming here, he said. Everything you've described, unauthorized transactions, forged signatures, fraudulent credit lines. It's serious. You're lucky you caught it before they tried to go further. I nodded, staring at my hands folded in my lap. They already tried. They requested a verification to sell my house. His brow furrowed. Did you sign anything? No, not yet. Good. He leaned back in his chair. That gives us time. For the next hour, he walked me through every detail, the financial protections, the legal filings, the steps to lock down every asset. I listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions. I wasn't going to be the confused old woman they could manipulate again. Not ever. At one point, Daniel looked at me over his glasses and said, Evelyn, I've known you for years. You've always been the kind of person who gives without keeping score. But you have to understand, some people mistake kindness for weakness. You can't let that happen anymore. I met his eyes and said quietly, I won't. When we finished, he pulled out a fresh document. This is the new will. You can assign assets however you want. Do you have a plan? Yes, I said, and my voice didn't shake this time. I'm removing Hannah and her husband completely. I'll leave the house and my savings to the local children's foundation. They helped Richard when he was sick. They actually deserve it. Daniel smiled faintly, a small flicker of approval. That's poetic justice. As I signed the papers, I felt something shift inside me, a subtle but undeniable sense of control returning. The pen glided across the page, and with every stroke, the weight I'd been carrying for weeks began to lift. When I left the office, the afternoon sun was sharp and bright. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the warm air, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since that text message, I wasn't afraid. On my way home, I stopped at a cafe I hadn't visited in ages. The barista, a young man with kind eyes, handed me a cup of tea and said, You look like someone who just made a big decision. I smiled. Maybe I did. That evening, I went through my house methodically. I locked away all important documents, deleted shared accounts, changed passwords. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns out quickly. What I felt now was colder, cleaner resolve. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Hannah. "Can we talk, please, Mom? I didn't mean for things to go this far." I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened the notebook where I'd been keeping records of everything. On the first page beneath Phase 1 documentation complete, I wrote Phase 2 observation. If they thought they could use me, I would show them what it meant and to underestimate someone who had lived a full life, who had built everything with her own hands. For the next few days, I watched, quietly, deliberately. I didn't respond to her messages, but I saw the notifications, each one more desperate than the last. "We just need to talk. Jameson's under a lot of stress. Please don't do anything rash." Then another, "We could sell the house and split the profit. It would help everyone. Think about it, Mom." She wasn't even pretending anymore. It was about money now, nothing else. By the 5th day, I received a call from Daniel. "Everything's finalized. Your assets are legally protected. If anyone tries to access or sell the house, they'll trigger an alert." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Evelyn, what are you planning to do now?" I smiled faintly. "Nothing, not yet." He chuckled softly. "You sound like your husband when he was planning to win an argument. Calm, dangerous." Richard always said, I replied that the best way to defeat arrogance is to let it speak until it condemns itself. That night, I finally answered Hannah's message. I kept it short. "You can come by tomorrow afternoon. Bring your husband." When I hit send, I felt no tremor of fear, no lingering doubt, just a quiet readiness. The next afternoon, they arrived right on time, dressed as if for a business meeting. I opened the door, calmly offered them seats, and watched as they performed their practiced act of concern. Mom Hannah began her tone cautious. "We just want to clear the air. Things have gotten complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, sitting opposite them. "That's one word for it." Jameson leaned forward, clasping his hands. "We made mistakes, Mrs. Brooks, I admit it, but you have to understand we were under pressure. The wedding, the expenses, it all got out of hand." I said nothing. Silence has a way of making people confess more than they intend to. Hannah continued, her voice breaking slightly. "Mom, I know what we did was wrong, but we need your help now, please. Just a loan, we'll pay you back." I tilted my head. "How much?" She hesitated. 20,000. I almost smiled. "That's an expensive lesson in consequences." Jameson's jaw tightened. "We're not asking for charity, just a loan. We're family." "No," I said softly. "You stopped being family when you forged my name." The color rose in his cheeks, but before he could respond, I continued. "You've been lying for months. You stole my savings, opened accounts in my name, and tried to sell my home, and now you're sitting in front of me asking for more. Tell me, Jameson, does that sound like family to you?" He didn't answer. Hannah started to cry again, but this time I didn't reach for her hand. Instead, I reached for the envelope on the table and slid it toward them. "This is a copy of my new will. I thought you should see it." Jameson took it confused and began to read. As his eyes moved down the page, the color drained from his face. Hannah looked at me terrified. "Mom, why would you do this?" "Because I said quietly, you both needed to learn something. Your father and I learned the hard way that nothing built on lies can last. You wanted my money, my house, my legacy. You forgot that I built those things not with greed, but with integrity. And now that's all I have left to give." Hannah's sobs grew louder. Jameson stood abruptly, throwing the envelope on the table. "You can't do this. We have rights." "No," I said calmly. "You had opportunities. You wasted them." He glared at me for a long moment, then grabbed his coat. "You'll regret this." I smiled faintly. I doubt it. After they stormed out, I stood by the window watching as their car disappeared down the road. I felt neither triumph nor sorrow, just a deep, clean silence. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was something close. That night I wrote another note in my notebook, Phase 3 Exposure. I didn't know exactly how it would happen, but I knew the truth always found a way to surface. And when it did, I would be ready. Before going to bed, I walked into Richard's old study, a place I hadn't entered in years. Dust floated through the thin beam of moonlight cutting across the room. I ran my fingers along the shelves and whispered, "You were right, love. Silence is power." and now they'll learn what it can do. I stood there for a long time listening to the quiet hum of the night outside. There was no more trembling in my hands, no fear in my chest, only clarity. They thought I was weak because I was silent. They forgot that silence can be a weapon. If you discovered that your silence could destroy the very lies meant to control you, would you use it? Comment 1 if you'd wait for the right moment or hit, like if you'd strike first. Because sometimes justice isn't loud, it's patient, precise, and unstoppable. The next day, rain fell steady and cold, tapping against the windows like a steady heartbeat. It had been 3 days since Hannah and Jameson last came to my house. I hadn't heard a word from them since, but silence has a way of filling itself, and I could feel it building towards something inevitable. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. I knew greed rarely does. By afternoon, my phone rang. Hannah's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Mom," she began softly, her voice shaky, rehearsed, "Can I come over alone?" Her choice of words told me everything alone. She wanted to distance herself from him, at least for now. I agreed. When she arrived, she looked exhausted. Her hair was tied back hastily, her makeup barely covering the dark circles under her eyes. She wasn't the polished woman who had stood beside Jameson days ago. She looked younger, smaller, like the girl who used to run home after school to tell me about her day. I gestured toward the chair across from me. "Sit." She sat, eyes darting to the floor. "Mom, I don't know where to start." "Try the truth," I said quietly. Her lip trembled. "I never wanted to hurt you. I swear. Jameson said it was just a formality, using your name for the accounts. He told me we'd pay it back before you ever noticed. But then, things got worse. Worse. He lost money on a business deal. Then the investors backed out. He said we needed to look stable. That's why we had the wedding at the pavilion. His parents expected it. He said if we looked successful, people would invest again. I was scared, Mom. I didn't know what else to do." I watched her carefully. "And when you forged my signature to sell my house, was that fear too?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "That was him. I didn't know about that until afterward, I swear. He said you'd never find out. He said it was just paperwork, that nothing would happen unless you agreed. Yet you didn't stop him." Her sobs grew louder. "I thought he loved me. I thought he'd fix everything." I sat back, the ache in my chest almost unbearable. For a moment, the mother in me wanted to pull her close to tell her it would be all right. But then I remembered the forged forms, the stolen money, the look on Jameson's face when he called my house an asset. That impulse faded quickly. "Hannah," I said softly, "love doesn't excuse betrayal. You can't hide behind his choices when you signed your name beside his." She looked up, her eyes desperate. "So what now? You've cut me out of everything. You've changed your will. I've lost everything." "No," I said. "You haven't lost everything. You still have a chance to be honest, to fix what you can." She shook her head. "It's too late." "It's only too late if you stay silent." Her sobs quieted. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain outside filled the silence. Finally, she whispered, "He doesn't know I'm here. He'd be furious if he did." "Good," I said. "That means there's still a part of you that knows right from wrong." She wiped her tears and looked at me, her voice breaking. "I want to make it right, Mom, but I don't know how." "You start by telling the truth," I said. "To me, to the authorities if you have to. But it has to come from you. No more lies, no more pretending." Her gaze dropped again. "If I tell the truth, I'll lose him." "You already did," I said quietly. "You just haven't accepted it yet." Her shoulders trembled. For a moment, she looked like she might speak again, but then she froze. The sound of tires crunching over wet gravel echoed from the driveway. We both turned toward the window. A sleek black car had pulled up. Jameson stepped out, an umbrella in hand. Hannah's face went pale. Oh God, he followed me. I stood up calm but cold, then let him in. She hesitated, terrified, but before she could move, the front door swung open. Jameson stood there, rain dripping from his coat, his smile sharp and wrong. "There you are," he said. "I thought we agreed we'd do this together." Hannah flinched. "I told you not to come." He ignored her and looked straight at me. "Mrs. Brooks, always a pleasure." I didn't offer a seat. "You have a strange definition of pleasure." He chuckled. "You know I've tried to be patient, but you're making things harder than they need to be." "Harder for you, you mean?" He dropped the pretense. Let's not play games. You're sitting on an asset worth nearly $500,000. You're alone, retired, no dependents. Why cling to something you can't maintain? Sell the house, we all win." I met his gaze unflinching. "You mean you win?" His jaw tightened. "If you weren't so stubborn, this could have been easy. Easy for you to rob me." Hannah stepped between us. "Stop it, both of you," she cried. "This isn't helping." Jameson turned on her, his voice sharp. "You said you'd convince her. You said she'd come around." "I didn't say that," she shouted, trembling. "I told you I'd talk to her, not beg her to sell everything she owns." He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. "You're pathetic. You can't even keep your own mother under control." The words hit her like a slap. She took a step back, tears spilling again. I moved forward, then my voice calm but hard as steel. "You will not speak to her like that in my home." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're home. Not for long." I smiled faintly. "Actually, that's where you're wrong." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I walked to the cabinet, pulled out a folder, and handed it to him. "That's the legal notice confirming new ownership designations. Everything in this house, every asset, every account is now protected under charitable trust. You can't touch a cent. And if you try, it's a criminal offense." He flipped through the papers, his confidence slipping. "You think this scares me?" "It should," I said, "because I've also filed a report for identity fraud. If I wanted to, I could have you in handcuffs by morning." The silence that followed was electric. Hannah stood frozen, her hands over her mouth. Jameson's face hardened. "You wouldn't dare." I smiled again. "You've mistaken my silence for fear, Jameson." "It isn't." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he threw the papers onto the floor. "You'll regret this," maybe I said, "but I'll regret trusting you far more." He turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Hannah stood there shaking, whispering, "Mom, what have you done?" "What I should have done months ago," I said quietly. "I stopped being your victim." The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the roof like applause from a storm that had been waiting to break. If someone threatened to take everything you'd built, would you stay quiet? Or would you fight back with truth as your only weapon? Comment 1, if you'd stand your ground hit, like if you'd let silence deliver the blow. Because sometimes the loudest justice begins in a quiet room. 2 weeks passed after that stormy night. The days were quiet again, but it wasn't the fragile silence of grief anymore. It was the deliberate calm before something bigger. I spent those days preparing not for confrontation this time, but for revelation. There's a difference. A confrontation is anger meeting defiance. A revelation is truth meeting light. I called Daniel, my lawyer, and told him what I was planning. He listened, then said carefully, "Are you sure you want to do this publicly?" "Yes," I said. "They didn't just steal from me. They humiliated me. They made a story out of my absence at that wedding, whispered that I was senile, unstable, bitter. If they want an audience, I'll give them one. Just not the kind they expect." Daniel was silent for a moment before answering. "I'll be there." The plan was simple. I invited a small group of people, neighbors, family friends, even members of Hannah's in-laws. I told them I wanted to host a reconciliation dinner. "It's time to make peace," I said on the phone. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they did their job. Everyone accepted, including Hannah and Jameson. The night of the dinner, the house was spotless. The dining table gleamed under soft golden light. The air smelled faintly of roasted herbs and lemon. I had cooked everything myself, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because control is a comfort, and every carefully arranged dish reminded me that this was my home. By 7 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. Laughter filled the doorway, compliments, handshakes, polite smiles. Hannah entered last, dressed elegantly in navy blue, her hair perfect as ever. Jameson followed, looking composed, almost smug. The performance had begun. "Mom, this is beautiful," Hannah said, kissing my cheek. Her voice trembled slightly. "Thank you," I said evenly. "I wanted tonight to be memorable." As we sat down to eat, the conversation flowed around trivial things, the weather, local events, travel plans. Everyone was waiting for the reconciliation. They wanted the drama to end neatly, the way stories in small towns always do. I played my part, smiling, politely, listening, waiting. Halfway through the meal, I glanced at Daniel, who sat quietly at the end of the table. He gave me a small nod. It was time. I set down my fork, the faint clink echoing through the room. Before dessert, I said I'd like to thank you all for coming. I know there's been talk about my family, my daughter, and me. Tonight I'd like to clear the air. The chatter quieted. Hannah's hand froze around her wine glass. I continued my tone calm but sharp enough to slice through the tension. 2 months ago, I discovered that several unauthorized financial accounts were opened under my name. Over $30,000 was taken. My signature was forged. My home was nearly listed for sale without my consent. A murmur ran through the guests. Someone gasped softly. Jameson's smile flickered. Mrs. Brooks, maybe this isn't the... I raised my hand. Please let me finish. The person behind it used my trust, my love, and my name to build a lie. And tonight, I thought everyone deserved to know who that person was. The room was so silent you could hear the rain start again outside. Hannah's eyes filled with tears before I even spoke her name. It was my daughter, I said quietly, and her husband. Gasps rippled around the table. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. Mom, please! Jameson cut in, his voice tight. You can't just accuse people like that. You have no proof. Daniel stood then, unfolding a folder from his briefcase. Actually, he said evenly, we do. He laid out documents on the table, bank statements, forged signatures, the appraisal request for the house, screenshots of the credit accounts. The paper edges glimmered under the chandelier light like shards of truth. Jameson's face turned red. This is ridiculous. You can't. Daniel interrupted smoothly. You'll notice the digital authorizations trace back to devices registered in your name. We've already submitted copies to the authorities. Someone at the far end of the table whispered, my God. Hannah burst into tears. I didn't know. I looked at her. You knew enough. Her sobs filled the silence. Jameson tried to stand, but Daniel's calm voice stopped him. I'd sit back down, Mr. Cordell. You're not under arrest yet, but I imagine that won't take long. Everyone was watching now. The neighbors who had whispered, the in-laws who had looked down on me, the friends who had pitied me, they all saw it unfold like a scene they couldn't look away from. The perfect couple's mask cracking in real time. Jameson's charm dissolved completely. He turned to Hannah, seething. You told her everything, didn't you, you stupid? Enough, I said sharply. My voice carried through the room like a strike of lightning. Not another word. He froze. I stood slowly, straightened my shoulders, and looked at everyone gathered around the table. I was humiliated once at a wedding. I wasn't invited to a celebration I paid for without knowing. I stayed silent then. But silence is only noble when it protects the innocent. When it protects the guilty, it becomes complicity. And I refuse to be complicit in my own destruction. The room remained still. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. I looked at Hannah. You used to call me your rock, but you forgot that rocks don't just hold things up. They also crush whatever tries to bury them. Her sobs broke again. Mom, please. I'm sorry, I'll fix it. I'll fix everything. I shook my head. You can't fix what was never broken in the first place. You can only face what you destroyed. At that moment, 2 uniformed officers stepped through the open doorway. The guests turned startled. Daniel spoke quietly to them, handing over documents. One of the officers nodded and approached Jameson. Mr. Cordell, we need you to come with us. Jameson's face went pale. You can't do this. This is private property. The officer replied, You made it public when you forged financial documents. Please stand up. Hannah screamed his name as they led him out, her voice cracking in desperation. The sound echoed through the house, through every corner where love used to live. When the door closed, I stood there, my hands steady. The guests began to whisper, then slowly rise from their seats, unsure what to say. Daniel touched my shoulder gently. You did what had to be done. I nodded. No, Daniel. I did what I should have done the first time she lied to me. The last guests left quietly, murmuring their disbelief. Hannah remained kneeling by the chair. Her mascara streaked her sobs quieter now. I walked to her, placed an envelope on the table beside her. Inside were the same photos she'd sent me months ago, her wedding pictures. I'd printed one and written on the back, Happiness built on deceit always ends in the rain. She looked up at me through tears. Will you ever forgive me? I looked at her for a long moment, my heart both aching and strangely calm. Maybe one day, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and I will never forget. I turned and walked toward the window. Outside, lightning illuminated the wet street, and in that flash, I saw my reflection, older, steadier, alive. For the first time in months, I didn't feel erased. I felt rewritten. If you had to expose the people who betrayed you in front of everyone, would you find satisfaction or sorrow in the truth? Comment 1. If you believe justice is worth the pain hit, like if you believe forgiveness takes more strength, because sometimes when truth finally stands in the open, it doesn't shout, it simply breathes and everyone else goes quiet. By morning, the story had already grown wings. It traveled through the town faster than the rain that had soaked it the night before. The neighbors who had once whispered behind drawn curtains were now whispering to each other in the open. The perfect couple. The ones who threw garden parties and spoke of business ventures had been exposed as frauds, and the quiet widow they'd mocked had stood her ground before them all. I didn't have to tell the story. It told itself. By noon, Patricia came knocking her usual cheer, subdued by something that looked a lot like respect. "Evelyn, dear, I just wanted to say," she hesitated, clasping her hands, "you did the right thing. Everyone's talking about it, but for once they're on your side." I offered her tea the same way I always had, though this time she spoke softer, almost careful. "They're saying you stood up to that man in front of the whole dinner table, that you had proof and everything." I smiled faintly. People like to add details when they retell a story. But yes, I stood up. Patricia leaned closer. "Good for you. About time someone did." She lowered her voice. "He's been arrogant since the day they moved here. Acted like money made him untouchable. Well, not anymore." She was right. By evening, the local paper had picked up the story, "Prominent local couple faces fraud allegations." It didn't use names, but everyone knew. A neighbor's cousin worked at the station, another at the courthouse. Small towns don't need newspapers to spread truth. They have mouths. That night, I sat by the window listening to the rain return. It was lighter now, softer, almost cleansing. I thought about Hannah, about how every lesson worth learning seems to arrive after the damage is done. I wondered if she understood what dignity costs and what it saves. The next morning, my phone rang again. Linda's voice came through full of cautious pride. "Evelyn, it's everywhere. You've become the story no one expected." "I didn't want to be a story," I said quietly. "I know," she said, "but sometimes we don't get to choose. Sometimes the story chooses us." I sighed. "Hannah, she's the talk of the town, too. Her gallery job put her on temporary leave until the investigation's over. I think reality's finally caught up." I thanked Linda and hung up my chest heavy. Justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels quiet, almost hollow, the sound of balance being restored. That afternoon, as I was pruning roses in the front yard, a car pulled up. It wasn't the police this time, nor any of the gossip-hungry neighbors. It was someone I didn't expect, a woman in her 40s, dressed neatly but plainly. She stepped out, clutching a file folder. "Mrs. Brooks." "Yes." "My name's Angela Chen. I work with the community outreach program downtown. We heard about your case." I straightened, wiping my hands on my apron. I didn't realize my life had become a case. She smiled gently. "It's more than that. What you did standing up for yourself, protecting your finances, it's an example. We've had older residents fall victim to similar frauds. We'd like to use your story to educate others. With your permission, of course." For a long moment, I didn't answer. Then I looked past her toward the house, the same house they'd tried to take from me, and said, "If it helps someone else keep their home, then yes." Angela smiled. "Thank you. That takes courage." After she left, I sat on the porch and thought about that word, courage. People always imagine it looks like shouting, like anger, like fists slammed on tables. But sometimes, courage is paperwork, signed quietly in an office passwords, changed boundaries redrawn. It's learning that survival doesn't always sound heroic. Sometimes it just sounds like breathing. By the end of the week, I started getting letters not from family, but from strangers. Handwritten notes, shaky cursive on cheap paper. One read, "My son's wife did the same to me. I didn't know I could fight back until I heard about you." Another, "Thank you for reminding me that it's not weakness to protect yourself." Each letter felt like a balm on an old wound. Maybe my pain had been meant to serve a purpose larger than humiliation. Maybe that's how redemption begins, not by undoing what was broken, but by showing others how to survive it. Meanwhile, the fire kept spreading. Jameson's name was all over the local news by now. The investors he'd lied to came forward, and what had started as a domestic scandal turned into a full investigation into his business practices. The town that once admired him now treated his name like a cautionary tale. And Hannah, she finally called. Her voice was small, unfamiliar. "Mom," she whispered, "they let him out on bail. He's blaming me for everything. I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes. "Tell the truth. That's all that's left to do." "I already did," she said, her voice breaking. "I told them everything. I told them it started with me believing him. I told them you didn't deserve any of it." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then quietly, "That's a start." "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, "but I'm trying." I nodded to myself. "Keep trying." When the call ended, I sat in the fading sunlight, the roses glowing red around me. The world had shifted not in my favor, not against me, just into balance. Justice, I realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it unfolds in whispers, in the way people look at you differently, not with pity, but with respect. 2 days later, Angela sent me a copy of the article they'd published online. "Elder Woman Outsmarts Financial Fraud Inspires Community to Take Action." Underneath it was a quote she'd pulled from our conversation. "Sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's waiting for the right moment to speak." When I read it, I smiled. For the first time in months, the quiet in my house didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. If your story could protect someone else from the pain you endured, would you share it, even if it meant reliving every wound? Comment 1. If you'd turn your pain into a lesson hit, like if you'd rather leave it buried, because sometimes healing isn't just personal, it's contagious. By autumn, the story that had once shaken my world began to settle into memory. The headlines faded. The whispers dulled, and life as it always does found its rhythm again. The leaves turned the color of rust and gold, the air sharpened, and my house, the house they had tried to take, stood steady through it all. I had thought the end of it would feel triumphant, but victory, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with cheers or closure. It comes quietly, like a sunrise through heavy clouds, slow, hesitant, but unstoppable. Jameson was convicted in late September. The charges were clear financial fraud, identity theft, forgery. He pled guilty in a last attempt to minimize his sentence. The court ordered restitution, but I didn't care about the money anymore. What mattered was that the truth was written down, official, permanent, undeniable. I didn't attend the sentencing. Daniel offered to go in my place, and I let him. I didn't need to see Jameson in handcuffs to know I'd finally been free of him the day I stopped answering his lies. Still, when Daniel called afterward, his voice carried a note of gravity. "He's getting 5 years, Evelyn. Maybe less with good behavior." "Good behavior," I repeated softly. "That's something he should have tried before prison." Daniel chuckled, then grew quiet. "And Hannah?" I hesitated. "She hasn't been by since the night of the dinner. She might reach out again," he said gently. "Be ready for that." I told him I would, though I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. Ready for what? For forgiveness, for more pain, for the strange mix of both that life seems to hand out once you think you've had enough. For weeks, I didn't hear from her. The silence wasn't cruel this time. It was respectful, almost thoughtful, like she finally understood that silence had meaning. I spent my mornings walking through the garden, pruning, replanting, tending. There's something sacred about putting your hands in the soil after everything else has been stripped away. It's grounding, literally and otherwise. One morning in October, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address, just my name written in familiar, uncertain handwriting. Inside was a letter. "Mom, I don't know if I have the right to call you that anymore, but I need to try. I've been meeting with a counselor through the outreach program. They told me to start by taking responsibility, not asking for forgiveness. So here it is. I used you. I betrayed your trust. I let someone convince me that your love was something I could spend like money. I've lost everything because of it, my job, my home, my marriage. But maybe that's what I needed to understand what love actually costs. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I see it now. I see you. Hannah." I read the letter 3 times. The words trembled with guilt, but they were honest, stripped of excuses. I folded it carefully, placed it inside Richard's old journal, and whispered, "Maybe that's enough." The following Sunday, as I returned from church, I saw her, standing at the edge of my front gate holding a small paper bag. She looked thinner, older, her confidence replaced by a kind of fragile humility. When our eyes met, she froze. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," I replied. We stood there for a moment that felt endless. Then she stepped forward hesitantly. "I brought you something." She opened the bag and pulled out a small jar of homemade jam. "You used to make this every fall. I thought I'd try." I took the jar, turning it over in my hands. "Looks like you got it right." I had to call Patricia for the recipe. She admitted, a nervous laugh slipping out. "I'm surprised she shared it," I said, and we both smiled faintly, the first shared smile in nearly a year. "I'm sorry," she said then, her voice trembling. "For everything, for the money, for the lies, for pretending I didn't come from you." I looked at her, my daughter, my betrayal, my mirror. "Do you remember what you told me once?" I asked. "You said you wanted to be just like me when you grew up." She nodded, tears already welling. "Well," I said quietly, "you finally learned what it costs." She broke down, then sobbing into her hands. I didn't move at first. Then slowly I reached out and touched her shoulder. Not to comfort, not to erase, just to remind us both that the line between love and pain is thin, but it's still a line that can be crossed both ways. We didn't say much after that. I didn't invite her inside, not yet. But as she turned to leave, I said, "Hannah." She stopped. "Keep trying," I said. Her shoulders shook as she nodded. "I will." After she left, I stood there for a long time, the cool air brushing against my face. I realized forgiveness isn't something you declare, it's something you grow into, like a tree that finally learns to bloom again after being struck by lightning. That night, I made tea and opened the window. The world outside smelled of rain and fallen leaves. Somewhere down the street, I could hear laughter, young, bright, alive. It reminded me that not every ending needs to be quiet. Some just need to be honest. Over the next few months, things changed slowly. I started volunteering at the community center Angela had mentioned. I taught budgeting to young mothers, helped retirees safeguard their savings, and sometimes, when I felt brave enough, I told my story. Not the dramatic version, just the truth. People listened. They cried, they thanked me, and I realized something simple but profound, what was stolen from me, had been replaced with something far more lasting purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I walked through my garden again. The roses had survived another season, though the frost had started to creep in. I brushed my fingers against the petals and whispered to the air, "We made it." Inside, on the mantel, was a framed photo from years ago, Richard holding baby Hannah. I looked at it and smiled. The pain was still there, faint but present, like a scar that no longer hurt but still remembered. When I sat down to write in my notebook, I added one final line under my last entry. Phase 4, peace achieved. If you've ever faced betrayal and come out stronger, tell me, was forgiveness harder than revenge, or was it just quieter? Comment 1, if you'd choose forgiveness when the time comes, hit. Like if you'd rather walk away without looking back. Because sometimes peace isn't about forgetting who hurt you, it's about remembering who you were before they did. A year later, the light in my house feels different, softer. It doesn't hide the dust or the creases on my face, but it fills the room with something that feels like calm. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or applause. It settles like morning sunlight through an old window, touching everything that survived and making it shine again. It's been 12 months since that night, the dinner, the confrontation, the storm that followed. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, other times like yesterday. I can still see Hannah's face in that room, the shock, the shame, the way her tears made her mascara run like a child's paint set. But when I see her now, she looks different, lighter. Maybe we both do. We've rebuilt something, not what we had before, but something honest. She visits once a month. She always calls first, never just shows up. The first few visits were awkward, full of careful silences and half-finished apologies. Now they're gentler. We talk about small things, the weather, her new job at the library, the cooking classes she's started taking. Sometimes she brings fresh bread still warm. She always asks, "Do you need anything?" and I always tell her the truth now. Last week, she helped me plant tulip bulbs in the garden. She worked quietly beside me, her hands dirty, her hair coming loose from its braid. At one point, she looked up and said softly, "I used to hate this yard when I was a teenager. I thought it was too small, too plain. Now it feels safe." I smiled. It always was. That's the thing about time. It teaches you that safety doesn't come from walls or money. It comes from truth, even when that truth breaks you first. The town has moved on, as small towns do. Jameson's name still floats around in stories told over coffee or whispered in shops. That Cordell guy, remember him, but his story doesn't sting anymore. He's serving his sentence, and I've stopped checking how long is left. He's not part of my story anymore. Not really. The outreach program Angela invited me to has grown. Once a week, I sit in a small community hall with a group of older women and men, most of them quiet at first, carrying invisible bruises made not by fists, but by manipulation and betrayal. They remind me of who I was when all this began, unsure, ashamed to admit that love could hurt. In such a quiet, practical way, I listen. I teach them what Daniel taught me, how to protect themselves, how to ask for help, how to see boundaries as strength, not distance. Sometimes, after the meetings, one of them lingers to talk. They say things like, "I didn't know I could start over at 70, or I thought it was too late to stand up for myself." I always tell them the same thing. It's never too late to choose dignity. That's the word that has followed me through this year, dignity. It's quieter than justice, less satisfying than revenge, but far more permanent. Revenge ends when the other person falls. Dignity begins when you rise. One afternoon, I received a letter from the Children's Foundation that now bears my husband's name, the Richard and Evelyn Brooks Fund. They wrote to tell me that the scholarship we'd created from my estate had already helped 2 students enroll in college. One of them, a young girl named Naomi, had written me a note herself. "Dear Mrs. Brooks, I don't know who you are, but I want to thank you. My mom says you're the reason I can go to school. I promise I'll make you proud. I'll build something good, and I won't forget where it came from." I read that letter 3 times, then placed it on my mantle beside Richard's photograph. I imagined him reading it, his kind eyes shining the way they used to when he believed in someone's potential. For the first time, I felt that he'd still been part of all this, that somehow his quiet wisdom had guided me when I didn't know which way to turn. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my old notebook one last time. The first page still read, Phase 1 documentation complete. The last page, written months ago, said Phase 4 peace achieved. Beneath it, I added one final line, Phase 5 life continues. I closed the book and placed it on the shelf beside Richard's journal, not as evidence anymore, but as testimony. Proof that I had lived through something sharp and come out softer, not weaker. Later, as the sun began to set, I stood in the kitchen making tea when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked out and saw Hannah stepping out carrying a basket. She waved through the window. "I brought soup," she called. I smiled. "Then come in before it gets cold." We ate together at the same table where so much had been broken. The air between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was real. She told me about her work, about the people she'd met who didn't know her past and didn't need to. She said she was saving up to buy a small apartment. "That's good," I said. "A place that's yours." She nodded. "I learned that from you." When she left that night, she hugged me not out of habit, not out of guilt, but with intention. The kind of hug that says I understand now. And for the first time, I hugged her back without hesitation. After she drove away, I stood at the doorway, watching the taillights fade into the dusk. The air smelled faintly of rain, and for a moment I thought of that first message. We got married yesterday. How those words had once destroyed me, how they now felt like the beginning of something I had needed to face all along. Life has a way of giving us the same lesson in different forms until we finally learn it. Mine was this: you can't teach people to value you. You can only value yourself so clearly that they're forced to see the reflection. As I walked through the house, turning off the lights, I stopped at the window. Outside, the moon was rising soft and full, casting a pale glow over the garden, where the tulips were beginning to bloom early. I thought about all the things I'd lost money, trust illusions, and realized how much I'd gained instead. boundaries, wisdom, freedom. I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Richard. Thank you for teaching me that love without respect is just dependency, wearing perfume." The clock ticked softly. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. I smiled, closed the curtains, and went to bed. For the first time in years, I slept without replaying the past, without waiting for the next betrayal. Just the sound of the wind outside and the calm certainty that I had survived it all. Not bitter, not broken, just whole. And maybe that's all the closure any of us ever really get. Not an apology, not revenge, just the quiet realization that the story didn't end when they hurt you. It ended when you decided it wouldn't define you. If you've ever lost everything you thought you needed only to discover what truly mattered, tell me, what did you find in the silence that followed? Comment 1. If it was peace hit, like if it was strength, because sometimes the end of one life isn't a tragedy at all. It's just the moment you finally come home to yourself.